A thick mist covered the cemetery as the priest prepared to deliver his final words. The damp earth mixed with the crisp morning air. Family and friends stood in silence, weighed down by the sorrow of farewell, their faces marked by grief and longing. The priest adjusted his stole and took a deep breath before beginning the ceremony. Then, suddenly, a bark echoed through the tombstones. Everyone flinched. A thin, dirty dog appeared, racing through the cemetery, dodging gravestones and wilted flowers. His eyes burned with desperation, his trembling body a clear sign that something was terribly wrong. Ignoring the stunned looks of those present, he ran straight toward the coffin, scratching at the wood frantically and letting out heartbreaking howls. Whispers spread through the crowd. Who let this dog in? Where did he come from? They murmured among themselves. One of the gravediggers tried to shoo him away, but the animal dodged and returned to scratching the coffin, even more determined. Something was driving him to keep going. Tension filled the air. The priest struggled to maintain his composure, but a chill ran down his spine. He exchanged uncertain glances with the family members, their expressions shifting between confusion and fear. The silence grew heavier. Then someone in the crowd made a decision. The only way to calm the dog was to open the coffin. As the lid was lifted, the priest instinctively stepped back. A cold wave ran through his body. His face went pale, and he had to steady himself against a nearby headstone to keep from collapsing. If you were there, how would you have reacted seeing the dog interrupt the funeral? It was a day of mourning. The funeral of a respected man in a small town near Manchester had brought the entire community together. Father James, experienced and composed, was about to conclude the service when a strange sound cut through the silence. A sharp, relentless bark echoed through the graveyard. Everyone turned. There it was, a skeletal, unkempt dog. Its fur, matted and filthy, dashed toward the coffin. His eyes glowed with desperation. His breath ragged, as if he had run a great distance to get there. The dog leapt onto the closed coffin, clawing at the wooden lid with all his strength. His barking grew louder, his howls piercing the somber atmosphere. Some attendees attempted to pull him away, but he growled and refused to move. He was determined. He would not let this burial happen. Murmurs spread among the mourners. Whose dog is this? What's it doing here? One of the gravediggers grabbed a shovel, trying to scare the dog off, but it wouldn't give up. It threw itself at the coffin again, digging its paws into the wood, as if it knew something was terribly wrong inside. The tension escalated. Father James, visibly unsettled, clutched his crucifix and whispered a prayer, trying to restore calm. But the dog kept going, his panic only growing stronger. There was no ignoring it. His instincts told him something that no one else could understand. What was he trying to say? Was he just a stray? Or did he know something that the people standing there could not see? Finally, one of the gravediggers, impatient and unnerved, decided that the only way to put an end to the confusion was to open the coffin. He hesitated for a moment, looking at the grieving family for permission. The tense silence lingered, broken only by their hesitant nods. With a deep breath, he began prying out the nails that sealed the lid. Each hammer strike echoed through the cemetery's heavy air. A quick reminder, in the Middle Ages, the fear of being buried alive led to the tradition of longer wakes. Illnesses like catalepsy could make a person appear lifeless, and to prevent tragic mistakes, bodies were kept under watch for hours before burial. Could this be one of those cases? As the coffin lid was removed, a scream of pure horror tore through the air. What they saw inside made the priest faint. Attention, we'd love to know where our viewers are watching from. Tell us your city, and if you enjoy powerful animal stories, like this video and subscribe. What they found inside made everyone recoil, as if an invisible force had pushed them back. Father James's eyes widened. He clutched his chest and collapsed onto the damp ground, unconscious. Gasps and screams filled the cemetery. Inside the coffin, alongside the deceased, was something unexpected. A hand, pale and motionless. The shock rippled through the crowd. Some tried to run, others stood frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. Was the man inside truly dead, or had another person been buried with him? The dog, now whimpering incessantly, gently licked the lifeless-looking hand emerging from the folds of a suit. The cemetery fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the dog's heavy breathing. The gravediggers hesitated. Their eyes darted from one another, waiting for someone to act. Finally, one of them mustered the courage to reach out and touch the hand. It was warm, a flicker of warmth, proof of life. Panic turned to stunned disbelief as one of the fingers twitched. It was no illusion. That person was still alive. Terror morphed into urgency. Two men carefully pulled the body from the coffin. The man was ice cold, his breath faint but present. The shocking discovery left everyone in a mix of fear and relief. How could this be possible? How could someone be pronounced dead, yet still be breathing? An ambulance was called immediately. As they waited, a retired doctor who happened to be present stepped forward and checked the man's vital signs. His pulse was weak, but it was there. "Catalepsy," he murmured, as those around him exchanged bewildered glances. The man had been mistakenly declared dead and had nearly been buried alive. If it weren't for that dog, the outcome would have been tragic. Now calmer, the dog lay beside the unconscious man, watching over him as if he knew his mission was not yet complete. His eyes, once filled with desperation, now carried a deep, infinite tenderness. He had saved a life, and everyone there knew it. The dog, still restless, let out a low growl and gently nudged the man's hand with his nose, as if trying to wake him. The silence was absolute. His instincts had led him here for a reason no one could yet understand. If this happened to someone in your family, how would you react knowing they were still alive? Shouts broke through the silence. Desperate, the onlookers rushed to help. The ambulance was called immediately. Meanwhile, one of the family members approached the dog and noticed something. He was wearing a collar with a name engraved on it. Max. Where had he come from? How did he know there was someone alive inside that coffin? The paramedics arrived quickly and, after a rapid assessment, confirmed the impossible. The man inside had been in a deep cataleptic state. He had been declared dead, but he had been alive all along. If the coffin had been sealed and buried, he would have been laid to rest while still breathing. The realization sent shockwaves through the crowd. As the medical team worked to stabilize the victim, Max remained at his side, refusing to leave. His eyes were fixed on the man, as if he knew the danger wasn't over yet. The paramedics administered oxygen and began resuscitation procedures. Slowly, the man's body responded. A faint breath escaped his lips. His eyelids fluttered slightly. Tears of relief filled the eyes of the gathered family members. Father James struggled to regain his composure. "This is a miracle," he whispered, still in shock. "Thanks to this dog, a terrible mistake was avoided, and a life was saved at the very last moment." The attendees nodded in agreement, stunned by what had just unfolded. Many approached Max, stroking him gently in gratitude. The dog seemed exhausted, but his mission was complete. Minutes later, the paramedics carefully lifted the man onto a stretcher and carried him out of the cemetery. He was weak, but alive. Max watched the ambulance drive away, his gaze calm, as if he finally felt at peace. What had brought him here? How had he known something was wrong? The answer would remain a mystery. But one thing was certain. Max had become a true hero in that small town. Do you think this was a miracle or just human error? Share your thoughts in the comments. Father James, still trying to process what he had just witnessed, wiped his trembling forehead with a handkerchief. Never, in all his years in the priesthood, had he seen anything like it. The family members, moments ago consumed by grief, now wept with relief and gratitude. Thomas, the man who had been pronounced dead, blinked slowly, trying to make sense of his surroundings. Why was he here? And why were so many people looking at him with a mixture of shock and joy? His body was weak, but his breathing was steadier. One of the paramedics gently held his hand and reassured him, "You're safe now." Thomas tried to speak, but his voice was barely a whisper. "The dog," he managed to murmur before his eyes closed again, exhausted. Max, the dog, remained right by his side, as if unwilling to trust anyone else with the man he had just saved. His tail wagged faintly, but his eyes stayed sharp and watchful. No one knew where he had come from, nor how he had sensed Thomas was inside that coffin. One of the townspeople, moved by the scene, knelt beside Max and gently stroked his head. "If it weren't for you, he would be gone," he said softly. The dog tilted his head slightly, as if he understood. Father James looked at the scene before him and finally found his voice again. "Today, we have all witnessed something beyond our understanding. This dog is not just a stray. He is an angel sent to remind us that life always finds a way to surprise us." Max remained there, watching over everything with attentive eyes, as if he fully grasped the importance of what had just happened. His tail moved slowly, reflecting a mix of exhaustion and quiet satisfaction. Who was he? No one knew, but one thing was certain: without him, Thomas would have been buried alive. If you could thank Max, what would you say? Leave a message for this hero. After undergoing medical evaluations, Thomas made a full recovery. The story of the dog who saved a man from his own burial spread quickly. People were amazed. How had Max known? Had he met Thomas before? Had he sensed the presence of life where everyone else saw only death? A local family decided to adopt Max, giving him the love and care he so deserved for the rest of his life. As for Father James, he never conducted another funeral without triple-checking the state of the deceased. The town never forgot the day a simple dog defied death and changed everything. And what if Max hadn't shown up that day? How many times have similar mysteries gone unnoticed? This story is a powerful reminder of the incredible instincts of animals and how even the smallest actions can change lives forever. Who would have thought that a wandering dog would become a true hero? Have you ever heard of something like this before? If you love heartwarming stories like this, tell us where you're watching from and leave a like for more incredible stories. Get ready for an unforgettable story right on your screen. Click now and meet the hero that will touch your heart.